I wasn't gonna make a whole video on the Miyoo Flip, and I wasn't gonna make a whole video on the 34XX either, but why not both? They both came through the PO box at the same time. I'm a little interested in the Anbernic RG34XX because the horizontal form factor is actually my favorite style of Game Boy Advance. But we've already seen a million of these Anbernic XX devices, and they're all pretty much the same. This one, along with the XXSP, have the capability of a 120 Hertz refresh rate, which can be modded to do some real cool stuff, which could be a bit of a bonus to some people. I was more interested in the Miyoo Flip. The Miyoo Mini kind of blew me away when it launched a few years ago. It changed my perspective on the emulation handheld market as a whole, which at the time had a lot of really terrible handhelds. I'm happy to give Miyoo some spotlight for innovating in a saturated space. Unfortunately, they just do not have the capacity to keep up with the likes of Anbernic. Miyoo will announce something, and before it can come out, Anbernic has already launched something similar. The SP was my second favorite console of last year. I played a lot of Sonic Adventure 2 on it. But what if it had thumbsticks? Sonic Adventure 2 would be way better, right? Which of these clone consoles is the one to get? Is it the 34XX? Just kidding, this is a regular Game Boy Advance. Is it the 34XX or is it the Miyoo Flip? Just kidding, this is a Game Boy Advance SP. Is it the Miyoo Flip? Which one's better? The pros and cons list for these can be pretty long. With all these form factors, there's something for everybody. But I think there's probably a pretty clear winner here. Excuse me, sorry. They said the room will be ready in like 30 minutes. Hey, what are you working on? I'm just checking my emails. I'm trying to pull up the itinerary here. Wow, wait a minute. Are you on the public lobby Wi-Fi _guest _2.4G? Yeah, man, I don't give a fuck anymore. I use Surfshark now. This video is sponsored by Surfshark. What do you, not use a VPN? What'd you call me? Gotcha. I don't use whatever that is. I don't bring my phone or my laptop with me at all. I do all my work on this. Ain't nobody hacking into this. Okay, pull up the itinerary on that then. Okay, all right, fine. Let's see here. Well, it's playing a basketball video that it came with, and I can't change it. Oh, Kobe. Okay, well, you let me know when you figure that out. VPNs can help you change your location so that you can access content that might otherwise be blocked in your country. VPNs can also encrypt your data so that nobody on your network can see what you're doing, not even your ISP. Surfshark One gets you their VPN, private web search, data leak alerts, and their antivirus. There's no risk to trying Surfshark. They offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. So secure your privacy by going to surfshark.com/den to get 4 extra months of Surfshark. Hey, so did you figure it out at all? Nope. It's now playing a Whitney Houston video that it also came with. Why is everybody on here dead? That's okay. Don't worry about it. I did it all like 10 minutes ago. Oh, okay, great. I'm still not getting a VPN, by the way. That's cringe. Oh, you got all this, by the way, right? All my funds are tied up in iTunes gift cards. James from my bank texted me and told me I needed to convert all my funds into iTunes gift cards. Oh, also, don't dip. I don't dip. The Miyoo Flip technically has a more powerful CPU than the Anbernic XX devices, but they both emulate pretty much the exact same systems. And I'd argue the theoretical performance boost the Flip has doesn't exist. Don't get it if you're expecting more. Although it does come with a case, so technically it does come with more. Although it is a clamshell, so you could just do that. You don't really need a case. I've heard a lot of people criticize the finish. It is pretty bad. It's not like bad to hold. It's not like it's hurting me, but it's pretty cheap looking and feeling. It feels very cheap, especially compared to other similar consoles. The hinge is also really stiff and harsh. It doesn't feel very satisfying, although it does articulate to the same degree as the original and the Anbernic SP. It is the exact same size and shape as an original Game Boy Advance SP. The Anbernic SP is actually slightly larger, even though, in my opinion, it looks more authentic to the original. The buttons are a little clicky, but not nearly as clicky as an Anbernic SP, and slightly less clicky than the original GBA SP that I have here. I know some people took issue with just how clicky the Anbernic SP's buttons are. I didn't mind them, but they might be thrilled to know that the Flip is a bit less harsh. The very first thing that I wanted to do was boot up Sonic Adventure 2, because in an otherwise extremely similar console, the big difference between the Anbernic SP and the Miyoo Flip is that thumbstick. Unfortunately, the placement is pretty terrible. I don't really know what the solution would have been. They kind of had to place it here if they were going for that authentic Game Boy Advance SP size and shape. They did use pretty tall thumbsticks, and in order for the clamshell to close, they needed to recess them heavily. I really don't understand this industry's aversion to short thumbsticks or circle pads. Most of the games I'm going to be playing on here don't even require a thumbstick, so I think it would be fine with a 3DS-style circle pad. Otherwise, the thumbsticks that this has are calibrated fine, and Dreamcast emulation is pretty solid by default on here. It's just really disappointing that gripping this console and using the thumbstick is just not a great experience. That's not where my gripes with the Flip end, though. The very next thing that I tried was Game Boy Advance emulation, because that felt pretty relevant here. By default, Game Boy Advance games have a very similar border on here that you'd see on the Anbernic SP. However, I'm not sure why, but the scaling looks a little worse on the Flip. I was noticing some moraying in the background and some weird flickers with the background movement. Apparently, for Game Boy Advance games, by default, the Anbernic is set to 640 by 426 resolution, which is a little squished. This is barely noticeable and looks just fine for some reason. On the Miyoo, the best I could do was turn off the overlay and turn on integer scaling. This helped the most, but there was still some moraying going on. Turning on threaded video didn't really seem to help. Also, every time I tried to save these settings that I was applying, RetroArch would crash. And save. And it crashed. So that's gonna give it a few points off. The very next thing that I tried on here was Perfect Dark, because that would be another game that I would play on an emulation device that would really benefit from having a thumbstick. And this has 2 thumbsticks. Oh, that's so much better. Unfortunately, it doesn't load. It crashed on both emulation cores. I'd have to chalk this up to bad firmware. Other easier to run games work just fine, like Mario 64, and the thumbstick works great there. It has full range of movement and everything. It's kind of hard to hit L2 and hold the thumbstick at the same time. And not hit L1. It's kind of very rough. But how can I not be a little disappointed by this? There's a lot of other devices that have been out for months that are similar to this and can play the full range of these console libraries just fine. The only difference is that a lot of them don't have a thumbstick, let alone 2 thumbsticks. This seems like a trade-off that we shouldn't have to be making. Just put a good thumbstick on a good handheld. What's the problem here? We can move on to the Anbernic 34XX SP. The name is just terrible. Just kidding, this is the Game Boy Advance again. Here it is. The name refers to the screen size. This one is 3.4 inches diagonal, whereas the SP and the other 35XX consoles have a 3.5 inch screen. Do you get it now? This one's unique because the screen is a 3:2 aspect ratio, making it the perfect aspect ratio for Game Boy Advance games. The resolution is 720 by 480, making it a perfect 3x integer scale for original Game Boy Advance games. It also looks identical to an original Game Boy Advance. It is the exact same dimensions. It's even the same thickness. I had to break out the caliper for this. It does look and feel thicker, but that's just because the cartridge slot is filled up. It's denser. Also, the L2 and R2 buttons are on the back part, so it feels a little strange having to position your fingers to press what would normally be the game's cartridge, which is a big no-no on an original actual Game Boy Advance. You do not want to press the cartridge while you're playing a game. But the buttons aren't that hard to reach, and it becomes pretty intuitive when you get used to it. The first thing I did on here was play a Game Boy Advance game, and it's probably the most perfect Game Boy Advance emulation you can get in a handheld right now. It's so close to a Game Boy Advance, but with a better screen and more buttons. It's an improvement, if anything. The screen is honestly better than my IPS modded Game Boy Advance 2, which I'm noticing has a bit of a warm tint for some reason. Maybe it's getting old and I booted up Sonic Adventure 2 for some Dreamcast emulation, because why not? This is a 4x3 game, so RetroArch adds some pretty ugly borders. You can turn these off, but the point is, by default, the game looks totally fine, aside from these ugly borders. I'm pretty used to playing this game with just the D-pad because of my time with the SP. To switch the D-pad to analog stick mode, you have to press the power button one time. It's not very intuitive, but it's fine. I think this console would benefit from having a circle pad right here where the start and select buttons are. Boy, do I love my circle pads. I know it would ruin the aesthetic of looking like an actual Game Boy Advance, but it would add some functionality and it would still be pretty pocketable. It also does play N64 games, even Perfect Dark, just without an analog stick. You can have R2 trigger the face buttons to become C buttons, and it's not terrible that way, but it's just not ideal.
You just have to press this first to get the D-pad to act as an analog stick, and then R2 works as a C button toggle.
These two devices are also capable of DS emulation, which is fine on a single screen device for the most part. Most games don't require you to look at both screens at once. You can just toggle between the two screens. Sonic Rush is a game I like to test on these, and that is not one of those games. You kind of really need both screens. Visually, DS looks fine on both of these. A little blurrier on the Flip than it does on the SP, but also the audio is worse on the Flip. When you swap screens, the audio hiccups. This does not happen on the Anbernic. Both the Miyoo Flip and this new Anbernic come with PC ports. Unfortunately, there's no way to put your own PC ports onto the firmware that comes installed on these, which is a bit of a shame and a missed opportunity. I think even the SP comes with PC ports now, if you get the latest firmware with the one that you buy. Also, it looks like the Flip comes with ports of commercially available indie games, which is a big no-no. Anbernic has been known to release their consoles with these very same ports, but it looks as though Anbernic has listened to criticisms because the new 34XX that I got didn't come with any of these ports. Also, almost all of these ports that it came with are open source ports.
What the hell is this? Ah! Oh my god. What is this game, man? Knock out all the sheep on Noah's Ark, I guess.
There are ways to get ports on the XX devices by using a custom firmware like Miyoo OS. I've done this on the SP and the V, and it's pretty sick to be able to play UFO 50 on a tiny device like this. I have a whole video on that, and all of that will work just as good, if not better, on the 34XX because the screen is a little wider. So 16:9 games like UFO 50 should look a little better on here. Unfortunately, there are currently no custom firmwares for the Flip because it's so new, so custom firmware developers are still working on them. There was a version of Rocknix that was released, but it was since taken down because the developer's own Miyoo Flip had bricked itself. Gamma OS is being developed for the Miyoo Flip, so maybe that will fix some stuff. I think it might actually be out by the time this goes up. Gamma OS Core is actually out already, but it currently caps at PS1 emulation. MinUI is also out. This might actually be the custom firmware to get right now. It pretty much gets you the best settings for each system and gives you a nice minimalist UI. And it's extremely easy to set up. Just read the README file for instructions. You kind of just pop it onto a FAT32 formatted micro SD card and then you're ready to go. Game Boy Advance is actually fixed on here for me. It's scaled beautifully. There's not even any Morang in the background anymore. But again, you're gonna lose some of the higher end systems on this, like Dreamcast and DS. Supposedly you could do N64 emulation on here, but I haven't quite figured that out, and that kind of ruins custom firmware for me. You're losing a little bit of functionality. Speaking of Gamma OS, the developer discovered something very interesting about the Anbernic SP and the 34XX. Both of these consoles seem to have a 120 Hz display, When I heard this news, I was completely uninterested. What am I gonna be playing on here at 120 Hz? Am I gonna port Marvel Rivals to this thing? Well, no, but this is really only useful for CRT emulation. With black frame insertion, every other frame will be a black screen. At 120 Hz, this will actually make the screen visually look more like a CRT. Couple this with some shaders, and I'm sure retro purists will be over the moon. This is honestly really cool to see. It's hard to translate well in a 24 frames per second video, but it does genuinely look more like a CRT in real life. Which sounds counterintuitive because you're removing frames, but that's just how a CRT works. It's drawing the image so fast that the whole image is never on screen all at the same time. So this method just works. And because it's 120 Hz, you're still technically getting 60 frames per second because every other frame is a black screen. It's an interesting concept, but this whole idea is still in its early stages. It looks really cool for a bit, but then there's a harsh, noticeable flicker about once a second. I hear that I might need to set my CPU governor to performance mode. Anybody know what the that is or how to do that? I will note that this is currently not available for the Miyoo Flip, and it might not ever be available for the Miyoo Flip because I'm pretty sure this is not a 120 Hz screen, and it requires that. Look, I don't want this to be a Miyoo Flip slam fest. I like Miyoo. This thing just came out. Maybe it needs a little more time to bake in the oven. But there are just a lot of compounding issues here that aren't really there on any of these Ambernick I picked up the wrong thing again. These issues aren't really there on any of these Ambernick devices that have been out for months now. These Ambernick consoles are all based off of the same platform and they have a ton of support. They all just look a little different. Maybe you just really need a thumbstick and that's worth a lot to you. So maybe you'd be willing to overlook a lot of the issues that I had with this. It's just really hard to justify for me because there's a lot of other similar devices that are in the exact same price point. Worst of all with the Flip, it just came out and it's out of stock. Miyoo always has stock issues. I was sent both of these devices by keepretro.com. I think they just got stock in for the Miyoo Flip, but who knows if they're gonna keep it in stock by the time this video comes out. I think this video comes out a day after they're putting it up for sale. Look, I'm just not sure there's a lot here that's worth waiting for. I would say wait for some firmware updates or custom firmware at least before getting this over some other Game Boy Advance clones. I haven't quite mentioned the Trimi Brick at all in this video. I don't think that's a Game Boy Advance clone, but it is also a phenomenal contender against these other devices. It is my favorite device in the price range and does a lot of the same stuff. And the emulation quality is pretty stellar by default, but it does not have a thumbstick. And I know that means a lot to a lot of you. Unfortunately, I just don't have a good alternative for a similar device with a good thumbstick. You have the Ambernick 40XXV, but that thumbstick sucks without custom firmware. Ambernick sucks at doing thumbsticks for some reason. There are other devices that have great thumbsticks, but they are way out of the price range. Maybe this is the only one to go for right now. It's just really disappointing because I know it could be better, and it's just not. I'm hoping for some updates soon and some custom firmware. Maybe that will get me to change my mind. Anyway, what do you guys think about all of these different Game Boy Advance clone consoles? Yay, I actually was not expecting to like the 34XX as much as I do. I think I just really like the Game Boy Advance, and this is literally just a Game Boy Advance. Anyway, leave it in the comments below, at me on Twitter, any and all of this other social media garbage. Hey, I streamed right here on youtube.com/wolfden last Sunday where I messed around with these devices, and the chat helped me out a little bit. I'm gonna do that again this Sunday, probably with another device. It'll be right here, so make sure you're subscribed to see that. Turn on all notifications so you get notified of live streams, and share this video with a friend if you think they'd be interested in getting themselves a very easy to use clone console so they can play their Pokemons and the Marios. Thank you very much. Have yourself a very good week. Have a good week. God, I haven't talked so long.